want to definitely make sure that they pop into the right depth as well. So a lot of people, like this one's sticking out a little bit too much. That's a little closer. So you want to turn your head to the side and look and make sure that your eyeball itself is going to be to where you have the nose, and then you have the eyeball, and then you have the corner of the eye. And check your photographs to make sure you've got it in deep enough. Like I think this one, the eye socket could possibly be a little bit deeper to let that eyeball drop in a little bit. And some people have deeper set eyes than others. So make sure you get their positioning correct. And looking at it from the front, make sure the eyeball actually fills the eye socket, nice and full. This one, the eyeball was about the right size, but the socket wasn't quite deep enough. And check and make sure you don't have one in deeper than the other. Like this one is in now a little deeper than this guy. So they're at the same depth to each other. They're close. But, I would fool around with these a little bit more if I were going to definitely keep them. And when you do this, you may figure out that, like this eye socket, the corner of this eye socket is actually back a little bit from the other one. So I may end up discovering that I need to add a little bit of eye socket to one side or remove a little eye socket to the other side just to make them match up just a little bit better. Okay, so once you've got that, you're then going to put the eyelids on. And the eyelids, honestly, are, and I'm going to do this in a larger scale, the eyelids are easiest to do together as a team. And that's too big. So this is a fake eye socket right here. I'm just doing it very large so it's easier for you guys to see. It's closer to the right size. So if you're like this one, if I were to make that deep enough, the clay is going to be built up like yay high. You can, as an alternate to making your eye socket deeper, you can actually take and cut the eyeball in half. Be careful when you cut the eyeball in half though. You can see how I distorted that guy, that you don't distort the eyeball too much. So you want to keep it nice and round, and then I'm going to check and make sure that it fits in there. Above the sides of my socket a little bit. And when you put the eyeball in, it is really easy to flatten out the front. See how I just flattened out the front of that eyeball? It's really easy to flatten them out too much. So be careful that you don't. Try to have clean fingers and the likes. So now that I've got my eyeball in and in place, and my flattened one there I would remove, you're going to roll out some eyelids. And for you guys, they should be probably about the thickness of angel hair pasta. Now this one's going to have a thicker eyelid. And you want to do the upper and the lower at the same time, and you want to do both eyes at the same time. That way you're more likely to keep them the same. If you are right-handed, you will find that your right eye is easier to do. If you're left-handed, you will find that your left eye is easier to do. So you want to take a measurement with your calipers and figure out exactly where the corner of your eye is and make a little mark right where the corner of your eye is. And that way you know that that's where you want to start and end your where you want to start and end your eyelids. So I'm putting that in a different direction so that we don't have the flat side. So then you can take your eyelid itself and you'll anchor it right into that little spot where you made the little divot for the eyelid. You want to make sure that when you put the eyelid on, that you really wrap it around the eye, that it doesn't end up being flat across. There is a temptation, a lot of people will end up putting their eyelids so that they lay flat across, and then there's holes in the corners. And we don't have holes in the corners of our eyes. The eyelid wraps around and matches the eyelid perfectly. So once you get both the upper and the lower into place, and you've just got it set there, the lower one usually sits right on the bottom of the eye socket. and the upper one is usually about a third down. So once you've got it into place, you can then take and real gently roll the lid around. And you want to be conscious of what the shape of the eye is. So a lot of times you'll have a little bit of a peak or a corner in one side of your eye versus the other. So like sometimes people have, if this is where the nose is, a little bit more of a peak right in here. Sometimes the peak will be right in the center and it'll be even all the way across. And some eyes will have the peak out towards the outside. So you want to be conscious of that when you're making the shape of the upper lid. Most of the time the lower lid is fairly even, although sometimes there's a little bit of a droop right in the outer corner. And on rare occasions I've seen it on the inner corner. And once you've got it rolled into place and you've got it exactly where you want it, then you're just going to take your tool and you're going to real gently press it into place and kind of smooth it. Try not to touch this side of it. You know, unless you're really, really balanced with your hands, try not to touch the inside. Just real gently, very, very lightly press that into place. And it'll stay put once you get it there. So to show you guys on the small one, and when I'm doing something delicate, I'm balancing my hands together. I'm always balancing the two hands together. So I'm real gently pressing that into place, but you don't want to press it too much because you want to actually make a little ledge there. Your eyelid itself is going to be a ledge. Okay? So I'll roll that one up a little bit, and I'll press that guy into place. And it looks a little bit easier than it is. You guys will probably, I think 4 to 5 times is about average for doing and redoing your eyes. Allie, you did it in what, 3?
Yes.
Yeah. So once you get that upper eyelid shaped and in place, you know, you can very gently go in with the back side of your tool if you've got a really good balanced hand and edge that around. You do want to kind of leave, see how there's a little bit of a hook right there in that corner there? You do want to kind of leave that little bit of a opening there, but keep them pretty smooth together. And then just blend it down. And some people will have like a little depression in here, in this area. Other people will be real puffy in there. And so you have to look at your own eye and look at the shape of the underneath of your eye and see if you need to add any material or you need to subtract any material. You know, like I think I'm going to pretend like this one is a little bit fuller in there and real gently blend that in. Now let's say I accidentally bump that and it's now out of place. You can do one of two things. You can, because that eyelid is not anchored down real heavily, you can go and pull it out and put a new eyelid in. The other thing that you can do is to real gently put another little round of clay back in over the top of it and then re-blend it into place. Now that, I think personally, that this is trickier than going through and just pulling the whole thing off. So if you don't get it right, just gently kind of pull that whole thing off of there and then roll up a new one and put a new one into place. And just realize that you're going to do this a few times before you get it right. You'll probably pull the eyeballs themselves out a few times before you get it right. I would recommend that you check with me before you get too far along on putting how deep your eyes are, if your eyes are in the right spot or not. So I've got that in the right spot. I'm anchoring it. That looks a little better. So once you get the eyelids, then there's the shape above the eyelid. And this is going to be different for different people. Some people it's going to come down and actually you'll have this real even crease above your eyelid and this whole area will be really full. Some people it's real sunken in to the brow and then it rounds up. Some people it's just straight and there's no little fold there. And that's something, again, that you're going to have to look at your individual photograph and you're going to have to figure out, am I full out here in the corner and do I have a hollow in there? Am I full all the way across? And real gently add little pieces of clay into. Okay? So, and it does take some practice. You can see how that filled that out. Now, I may need a little bit back in those corners. It's really hard for me to get my fingers in there without bumping the corners of the eyes. So see, I put a little bit on the back of the tool. Now I can slide that into place and then use the tool to bend it up into place. And I just grabbed a little bit of clay there to fill in that one last little spot. So that's a fairly natural looking eye. It needs to be smoothed out a little bit. You can, especially if you're a girl, add some eyelashes to the edge of it, and then you just want to flatten out a little bit of clay. And I recommend that if you do eyelashes that you only add it to the outer about third, maybe to the halfway point. And you just want to take and kind of anchor a little bit of clay the edge of the eyelid. It's maybe a little bit too big for this eye. And it was a little dry. So once you've anchored it in place, then you can smooth the outside. Let it dry just a little bit, and then you can take and real carefully with a knife trim them if necessary. You know, like those are sticking out maybe a little bit too much. And I just pulled them off. So, you may have noticed me lick the back of the clay. It made it a little bit wet so it'd stick a little bit. You can also just dip it into a bowl of water. You don't necessarily have to lick it. Saliva works really well though. So you just kind of trim those guys into place if you want eyelids. You don't have to have eyelids, okay? So a few other things to kind of note. So I'm going to go back to the big eye. You may want to think about if you are going to put an iris into your eye or not. And that's something that honestly it's pretty tricky to do. It does not look bad to have your eyeballs blank necessarily. It's not necessarily the most natural look in the world, but it's not necessarily a bad thing to have your eyeballs blank if you decide to go that route. If you do put an iris in, that's one of the things I want you to look in your research and look and see how different artists handle eyes themselves. There is a pretty common practice to actually make the eye socket completely hollow and just make an eyelid. And that's kind of a spooky look. It is left over from Greek and Roman sculptures where they left the eye sockets hollow and they put a glass eye in, but it still has a very natural eye look to it. So I'm giving a little bit of the lid right in there. Okay. So another option is to take and just very gently trace the iris on the eye. And when you trace the iris onto the eye, one thing that you want to notice or be really careful to notice is where does your iris sit? So does the upper lid bisect the iris? Is your iris small enough that it sits inside so you have a full circle that you see the top and the bottom? On occasions, the bottom will be bisected by the lower lid. Most of the time it's bisected by the upper lid, and trying to get that shape right I think is fairly important to making it look like you. And so at this point you can hollow all of that out. You can also take and just figure out where the center is and just take a little tool and kind of do a little cut in there. And that's a fairly naturalistic eye. You know, that's actually one of my favorites and one of the easiest. And you can see from the examples, some people will take and cut the iris and put texture into it. Some people will actually cut a pretty good size indentation out for the iris and then the little hole in the center. Some people will make, you know, a pretty heavy shadow. I mean, this is a particularly nice looking shape where they went through and cut real deep and then made the little scoop. You know, and you're going to try a few different things to figure out what's going to work for you and what's not going to work for you, essentially. And once you find it, then stick with it. Definitely. All right, questions about eyes? Just